Bismillah. So I wanted to talk about 10 books I would recommend if you're interested to learn about how Muslims view sex and intimacy and what several scholars have said about the topic in history. The first book I'll recommend is a very easy read. It's called Lust and Grace, Sex and Eroticism in the Works of Muslim Scholars by Ali Ghandour, who is a Moroccan scholar who's lives in Germany, but originally from Morocco. Really brilliant, easy to read book, which gives a nice overview of how many Muslim scholars in the past, prominent Muslim scholars, who wrote about sex and intimacy and how it wasn't considered to be a taboo topic, where they touched on a range of subjects from female masturbation, female orgasm, and other such topics. Again, you definitely can check this book out. So that's the first one. The second book is called Sex Education for Husband and Wife, Sex Education for Husband and Wife. And that is part of a series. This is volume eight of a series called Women's Emancipation during the Prophet's lifetime. So this book is called Sex Education for Husband and Wife by Abu al-Halim, Abu Shaqqa, no, Abdul Halim, sorry, Abu Shaqqa. It's a really excellent book, and he provides a lot of um provides a lot of hadiths and some verse from the Quran, but primarily hadiths, kind of explaining how attitudes towards sex and intimacy and gender interaction during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was very different to how it is now. So again, especially in terms of the references, it's a very excellent read in terms of debunking the way many Muslims view sex as a taboo topic. And again, this is a very good book with a lot of references. The third book is called Sexuality in Islam by Abdelwahab Bouhdiba, who was, sorry, a Tunisian sociologist. Very ex It's quite a detailed book. It kind of goes into not only the history, but like the philosophy of sex and how, again, how many Muslims prior to colonization, how they wrote about such topics such as sex and intimacy. He speaks about things like the infinite orgasm, really interesting. It's titled Erotology, variations on eroticism, certain practices. Again, it's a really sexual prohibitions in Islam. It's not a book about fiqh, like gives like rulings. It kind of talks about the evolution and the history of how the pre-colonial Arab world and Muslims, how they viewed sex and intimacy, and how it differs to not only many Muslims nowadays, the contemporary world, but also like Western society. So sexuality and in Islam, very good book, excellent book. And all of these books are available on Amazon. The fourth book I would recommend is Islamic Guide to Sexual Relations. Islamic Guide to Sexual Relations. This is by Muhammad ibn Adam al-Kawthari. This is by Muhammad ibn Adam al-Kawthari, who is a British Indian Islamic scholar. So he's traditionally trained. He's known as Mufti Muhammad ibn Adam al-Kawthari. The book is, again, it's got a lot of hadiths. It's got a lot of comments from Muslim scholars. It's primarily written from the perspective of the Hanafi madhab. I think, yeah, the scholar is he's from the Hanafi madhab. He's born and bred in the UK, but he's traditionally trained religious scholar. Again, it's a really good book, a lot of references, but again, it's mainly from the Hanafi madhab and the Desi South Asian perspective, but it has a lot of valuable advice. And again, it's got some source and references from both the Quran and the Hadith, as well as traditional Muslim scholars. So that's the fourth book, Islamic Guide to Sexual Relations by Muhammad ibn Adam al-Kawthari. The next book is this book called Sex, Soul and Islam by Osman, Sidek, and Enon Mansor, who are married to, they're authors. They're also um married. They're also marriage counselors, and they also facilitate workshops and provide coaching. Very easy to read book. Very nice book. It talks about like the ethics of sex and intimacy. It's not a book that just speaks about like rulings or anything like that. It does include a chapter on rulings, But some of the chapters, like he talks about the element of sex in our faith from the perspective of Islam. It talks about how to deal with marital rights, conjugal rights. It tackles some sensitive topics like verses to do with sex hadiths for women and sex hadiths for men, and some controversial ones in our time. It also tackles yeah, some of the controversial hadiths in our time, versus it talks about the rulings and etiquettes of sex, and it does they do make a wonderful argument talking about how the way a lot of Muslims have become quite um you can denying women's rights. A lot of it is because here it is. So the real reason behind the sexual machismo we see in the Muslim community, past and present, is the obsessive focus by men on the Prophet's advice to women while ignoring the guidance for men. So that's a really good point. So they talk about like the double standards, and they talk about like some Muslim chauvinists and how there is like an emphasis on men talking about women's ensuring that their husbands are sexually satisfied, but there isn't really much discussions talking about teaching men and helping men understand the importance of women's sexual satisfaction. And another really good quote, the author saying, many women are still clueless regarding sexual pleasure and their rights to it. And even among those who know of their sexual rights, many do not bother to pursue them as they do not miss something they never possessed in the first place. Yeah, powerful. This is a really good book. So Sex, Soul, and Islam, Osman, Sidek, and Enon, Mansor. Really good book. So one, two, three, four. So the next book is quite an academic book. Sex, but a very brilliant, absolutely brilliant book. Sexuality in the early medieval Islamic world. Female sexuality, sorry, in the early medieval Islamic world by Pernilla Mine, who is an associate professor of Arabic literature and history at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. She's also got a PhD. This is an excellent book. It talks about, I mean, she delves into um, the early Arabic sex manuals, like the Encyclopedia of Pleasure from the 10th century. She also, I mean, it's an in-depth, comprehensive analysis of female sexuality in the early Islamic world, looking at hadiths and how they were understood, interpreted by many pre-modern Muslim scholars, both within the Sunni tradition as well as the Shi'i tradition. She speaks about women's sexual rights and how that was understood in the pre-modern era. She looks at sexual poetry, so sexual comedy and women's bodies. Again, really excellent book. It's quite academic. It's a lot of references, but definitely um, highly recommended, well researched, excellent book. Female Sexuality in the Early Medieval Islamic World. The next book is Halal, Sex and Intimacy. Halal, Sex and Intimacy. And this is by Abdullateef Lanre Abdullahi, who's known as a Sudaisi. So he's a legal practitioner by profession, writer, social affairs analyst from Nigeria. It's a really nice book. It's written, I mean, it contains a lot of um, some statements from scholars, predominantly like Saudi trained scholars or Salafi scholars. So again, if someone is wants to know like what some Salafi scholars like Sheikh bin Baz and Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen have said about such matters, about contemporary issues, and this is like it's a really nice book. I mean, it covers a range of things from sexual hygiene, sexual communication, G spots, like oral sex. It's again very easy to read, and again, it's a nice book from a Nigerian perspective, from a Nigerian writer. Halal, Sex and Intimacy by Abdullateef Lanre Abdullahi. So that's Halal, Sex and Intimacy. Another book from a somewhat, you could say, a Salafi perspective. I'm not a Salafi, by the way, but it's just interesting to see the different perspectives. I've given one from like a more traditional madhab perspective, but this is another one from a Salafi perspective. Closer than the garment, marital intimacy according to the pure Sunnah. and this is by Muhammad al-Jibaly. So this is closer than the garment. What's nice about it, and again, it's you've got the Arabic, the Quranic verses and the hadiths in Arabic for those who can read Arabic. And you've got the Quranic verses, and then the hadiths which he uses to explain certain rulings. And again, most of these rulings again are really from the Salafi perspective. So he does quote, or Salafi Hanafi perspective, you could say, not Hanafi, sorry, Hanbali's perspective, sorry, because he does quote Sheikh Albani, Sheikh Ibn Baz, and Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen. But again, it's really, really easy to read, nice book, closer than a garment. Then the last two are my book. So the first one is A Taste of Honey, Sexuality and Erotology in Islam. So this is a book which provides quite comprehensive critical examination of sexual ethics um, and the art of lovemaking. So what this book is split into two parts. The first part is looking at, like I said, sexual ethics, looking at topics such as like love, beauty, sexual desire, how that was understood by a lot of Muslim scholars, especially in the pre-modern era. And then what is considered to be fidelity, like lawful relations, what is considered to be fawahish, unlawful relations, and then the pleasures of the garden, so intimate relations in paradise. And then the second part of the book is more like you could say a somewhat of like a sex manual where initially I talk about erotology, and then I kind of talk about what are the traits or characteristics that men generally find desirable in a woman, and vice versa. What do women generally find desirable in men? Um, and then there's a couple of chapters on how to perform a how to perform a sensual massage, the importance of preparation for sex, a chapter on oral sex and some tips for both men and women alike, a chapter on lovemaking positions, and then a chapter on orgasm and the importance of ensuring that your wife is sexually satisfied, and how to have a simultaneous orgasm, some tips on that. So that's A Taste of Honey. And then another book is that I wrote is called Women of Desire, A Guide to Passionate Love and Sexual Compatibility. So this is a book which is kind of really looking at how medieval manuals have been in existence from Muslim scholars um from prior to colonization, and I wanted to kind of highlight that there were a number of women, sexually empowered women, who were cited by Muslim scholars in their tradition, not only free-born Muslim women, but also a number of like the enslaved women who served as concubines, because they served as the inspiration for many of these scholars' works. I do give a kind of a high-level summary in terms of like the history of erotology and Muslim sex manuals. And then I kind of break it down. I talk about the female orgasm in Islam and Muslim cultures, give some examples of 10 sex manuals in by early Muslim scholars. And then I give examples in history of some sexually empowered Muslim women from that's mentioned in the Quran up until recent times, where we have some sex educators, sexologists, anti-FGM activists, yeah, and then I go into, I think there's how many chapters? About 36 chapters, looking at a range of things, mainly directed targeted to women, but obviously men can read it as well. That becoming sexually empowered, the importance of self-love um and understanding the female libido, arousal, high sex drive in women. I mean, I do go to a range. A lot of people have actually found this book easier to read than A Taste of Honey, especially initially. So again, these are the 10 books I would recommend if anyone, like I said, is interested in learning a little bit more about sex and intimacy in the Islamic tradition and what different Muslim scholars and Muslim writers have said about the topic.